and welcome to Kokoro Conversations. My name's Alex Lang. I'm here with my good friend, Sunil Bhave, and tonight we're going to have a nice conversation about expectations. And we're going to ask you guys to chime in with us to talk a little bit. But you probably remember Sunil if you've watched the Kokoro series. He was in the conversation we had about regret. So it was a whole episode about regret. And I wondered if you regretted coming on the episode after doing it.
No, it was a fun experience. I'm glad to be here. Thank you for hosting this and for inviting me here for a discussion.
Absolutely. Yeah, so Sunil's a really good friend of mine. We've known each other for a number of years. And so having the opportunity to talk to him about this, I think it'll be an interesting conversation. It'll be nice to be able to do more than just me, which is what it's been for the last couple of weeks. And so we'll have some back and forth. And we really do want to hear from you as we go through. Now, before we dive into our conversation, though, I did want to tell you that we are going to be doing a new part to Kokoro. It's called Kokoro Conversations. And so the person who I ended up doing this with when I was over the summer when we were filming, I had this very nice friend of mine. Her name is Rebecca Anderson. Rebecca helped me film, and oftentimes we would have these wonderful conversations after we had finished filming, and we were talking about a lot of the content from Kokoro from the episode of that day. And so ultimately what we ended up doing is we said, it would be kind of nice to be able to share these conversations with other people. So what we've done is we've created this time where each week we get together and we have a conversation around a topic, much like what Sunil and I are going to do tonight. And we go back and forth on something. So those are going to start coming out on February 1st. But we put together a little trailer for you. So we want to show you that trailer so that you get a little sense of what's going on. So go ahead and take a look. What makes life worth living? Amazing conversations. I'm interested to know, what are some of the qualities and characteristics that you look for in a good friend?
Time is the most precious, non-renewable resource that any of us has.
In our little thought experiment, we've come up with what's the most important thing, what brings us the most meaning, and yet I would say we probably don't spend most of our time doing that.
As human beings, we crave a real sense of safety, security, and kind of routine. On the other side of that, we're human beings that also crave novelty and crave new experiences.
Join Rebecca and I every week as we have fascinating conversations about how we can live more intentionally. Kokoro Conversations. New episodes every Saturday morning, beginning February 1st.
All right. I hope that you have the opportunity to watch it. As we were sitting here talking about it, Sunil reminded me that his episode was actually on risk as opposed to regret. Regret was Lisa Pisha. He was on risk. And I'll ask the joke again. Was it a risk coming on the show since I didn't get it right the first time?
It's a risk having these conversations without a script. But no, it was an amazing experience. I think hopefully it reached a good audience, and maybe some people could connect with it. And I hope that they connect with Kokoro Conversations as well.
Well, so one of the big things that came out of that episode was that you worked really hard to become a judge. And it was kind of all the things you had to do, the risk that you put out into the world to actually get there. So I want to start because I think we didn't get to put in the episode. We did have a conversation about it when we were talking in the kitchen and when we were doing that whole thing about kind of the trajectory of your life and how you eventually wanted to become a judge, like what allowed for that to happen. Now, I'm interested to know, though, what were the expectations for you growing up was there an expectation put on you that you would eventually be a lawyer or a judge or any of those things? Like, what were the expectations for you? And maybe give us a little background about maybe how you grew up and who your family was.
Yeah, no, that's expectations being a lawyer is unheard of in our family. Absolutely unheard of. Because you got to remember, my family came from India years ago. They're immigrants. They don't speak English very well. Their role here was to keep their head down, make a good living so their kids could have an education. And being a lawyer, we're involved in like shaking up the system. And there's a lot of public speaking involved. You have to have real strong command of the English language. And so lawyer was never something that was discussed in our house, never even an option that I considered. My parents are typical Indian immigrants, very strong in the stereotypical professions, engineering, mathematics, the sciences, and so that's the direction I was pushed in. I was raised to be a hardworking student and try to find a job that has a steady paycheck, and you don't rock the boat, you keep your head down, you don't cause problems, you don't want to be someone that's known for anything. And I think that's a very typical thing for immigrants in this country, is they come here and they don't want to rock the boat because they don't want to be seen, they just kind of want to keep their head down and follow the rules, work hard, and provide for the next generation. So for me, it was doctor, engineer, math, the sciences. That's where I was being pushed. And I was being told that these are career options for me from a very young age.
So how did you feel about that? Because clearly you went in a different direction. And were those, so you were pushed in the direction of math, science, those types of things. And did you feel that you had to live up to those expectations? Was that, or was it directly spoken to you? This is what you're going to do. Was there ever? I know sometimes conversations like that are had where you're going to be a doctor,
right,
and there's no choice in it,
and your path is chosen for you.
Yeah,
it was never directly or explicitly relayed to me that you have to be this, or this, but it's just the culture in the house that it was. We were always discussing. If you're a doctor, you can make this much money. Or if you're an engineer, you can develop these projects. My dad was an actuary. I thought my dad had a great career. He provided a nice life for a family. To me, most boring subject I could think of, being an actuary. But it makes good money, and you have a steady paycheck. You have your health insurance. You can take care of your family. So there was nothing ever explicitly told to me as far as what profession my destiny has in store for me. But it definitely was implicitly understood in the home that being a lawyer or being a politician or being in the public realm is something that you should maybe shy away from because there are too many risks. Comes back to risks. A lot of risks involved, right?
Regret. No.
A lot of risks and possible regrets. Yeah, time, money, expense.
So as we're talking, if you want to be part of the conversation, Brad, I see you there. If you'd like to chime in, I'd be interested to know, as we're talking, if there were expectations that were placed on you when you were growing up of things that maybe you were asked to do by, your family, or just expectations that you had of yourself. So, I think it's interesting that ultimately when did you originally kind of maybe break away, in your mind anyway, from that aspiration that had kind of been placed on you in some ways of saying, do the route that's going to get you the money and make sure that you're going to be safe and comfortable. When did you when did you veer from that expectation? Because I think that's an interesting thing. That's got to be a hard thing to do for you.
Yeah, and actually until about the 9th or 10th grade, like being a doctor or doing something in the sciences, I was actually thinking about that track. So when I was choosing classes in high school, I was looking at, well, what's the track for AP biology and AP chemistry? Because if I'm going to be in the sciences or maybe pursue medicine, I need to figure out what my trajectory is. But I had a very defining moment for me personally when I was in high school. I came across an article of the ACLU. I know we discussed that in prior conversations. And for me, what was very monumental was that there's an organization that's trying to fight for minority rights. And being a minority myself, you see, my entire life, when we talk about living up to expectations, I've always wanted to fit in. I've always wanted to be the guy that was not different. And so the expectations were who I was surrounding myself with. What were their lifestyles? How did they behave? What kind of career aspirations did they have? I sort of molded myself to fit in with the world around me. But with the ACLU, I saw an article with the ACLU defending some individuals who were challenging a nativity scene at a public display at City Hall. And I thought it was just fascinating that there is actually a group out there fighting for minority rights and trying to protect the individual rights of minorities against the will of the majority. And so expectations are all around us all the time, but I found a little bit of uniqueness and individuality in what was going on with the ACLU's case. And I just thought it was fascinating to be a lawyer, that you're actually standing up for other people's rights. And that idea of public service kind of was instilled in me at that point. I didn't think it was fully developed then.
Yeah.
But it kind of veered me
Planted
off the
the
trajectory.
seed.
Yeah, it kind of planted the seed of helping other people. And, you know, being an actuary, you are helping people, I guess, in a more global sense, but you don't really feel that real world impact of an individual client whose life is in trouble, and you are providing some avenue of relief for that individual client. And I kind of yearned for that.
To do social good.
To do some kind of social
good.
justice.
Yeah,
Yeah.
social. That's really impressive that you would, first of all, feel that, recognize it, and then be willing to pursue that in your life. Because I think for a lot of people where the expectations are laid on them, you know, hey, it's all about lay low,
Right.
get a good paying job, don't rock the boat. A lot of times, I think those expectations, whether implicit or explicit, can cause us to fold into ourselves. And you didn't do that. You were a person who actually, you know, you were willing to buck that expectation that had been laid for you. And I want to dive into that a little bit more in a second. We have a few people who have spoken. So Chris here has said, I was a product of a house that had zero expectations of him, and I'm interested, Chris. You know, if you're willing to talk about it a little bit, how did the fact that there were no expectations of you, how did that end up, you know, affecting you as you grew up? Was that something that impacted your ability to find your purpose in life and to find the way that you wanted to go throughout your life? Did that inhibit it? Did it open it? Having no expectations? I mean, sometimes not having anything can be freeing, but in some instances it can hold you back. And you know, it's interesting. So you also asked the question. You know, I wanted to ask you what your defining moment was that helped you find your direction. Yeah, I mean, for me, it's. Before we dive more into yours, I'll just do mine real quick. I remember from the time I was young, so we you know, I was for a long time, my career was as a pastor. And I remember I was like 6 or 7 years old, and we would go to church every Sunday. It was just really common. It was part of the culture of what we did, right? Like, I didn't know what it was about or anything, but I do remember having this vision at one point where I sat there and I was listening to the pastor talk. Again, no idea what he was talking about. I couldn't tell you. But for whatever reason, it clicked with me where I thought, that's where I belong. Like, I belong, like, that's where I'm supposed to be, is behind that pulpit. Like, what's interesting is I forgot about that moment for more than a decade, because what I was going to do was I was going to be an engineer. I was like, well, I got to make money. I got to, you know, that was kind of the thing. But that pull towards that was always there. And then I took a religious studies class at college, and I was like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. Not even thinking about it. And, you know, my parents really, I feel like, put a lot of faith in me, that I was like, I'm going to be a religious studies major. And they were like, okay,
right.
you know, like that, like, are you going to be able to provide for yourself?
Sure.
But it just went from there. So anyways, like, I guess it's to that point of like, you're bucking something that I think from your parents' perspective, they might not even fully understand.
Yeah, and you know, and as you just said that, you know, your parents, maybe their initial reaction was, are you going to be able to provide for yourself? And now we're both parents.
Yeah.
Right? We have kids in the same grade, same schools. And I'm also worried, too, when my kid tells me I'm going to be an artist. You know, right? And that's, talk about bucking the trend.
Yeah.
But how are you going to provide for yourself? And I think that's a natural reaction for a lot of parents to have, is especially when you as a parent, you want to have some influence on your children, because you want them to make sure that they're not making the same mistakes you made, that they're going to have a better life than you had, and you have a lot of life experience that you want to impart to them so that they're able to have a successful future and a career. When we talk about expectations, and Chris, when you said you had no expectations growing up in the home, my first thought was, wow, that sounds a little bit liberating. That sounds a little bit free, that maybe, Chris, you were allowed to kind of explore. But I think, like, as a parent, what we want to maybe focus more on is guidance versus expectations. Because I do think a lot of us as parents, and maybe Chris's example is rather unique, but a lot of us as parents, we think we know what's best for our children, right? Mm-hmm. And so when we hear a child say, I want to be an artist, or I want to be a preacher, or I want to be a lawyer, that's a very risky endeavor, right?
Right.
To quote from our prior episode. But that's very risky, and we get worried. And so I think that causes us as parents to level on more expectations, to direct our children onto a path that we think is safer.
Yeah.
But that may not be the right journey for the child. And you found a lot of success being a preacher. But being a preacher, there's a lot of risk involved. You're a leader. You have to get up in front of the pulpit, in front of the congregation, and you have to connect with an audience. And if you can't successfully connect with an audience, you're going to be a very unsuccessful preacher. As a lawyer, it's the same thing. I got to get up in front of a judge, and I have to be able to articulate, which I'm having a hard time doing right now, but I have to be able to articulate my client's position persuasively. If I can't do that successfully to a judge or to the random population of 12 jurors, I'm going to be very unsuccessful in my aspirations to be a good lawyer. So I think that what we have to be is very careful as parents or folks that we try to influence, to make sure we focus on guidance and not so much on expectations. Because we have to understand that it's other people's journeys in life. It's not necessarily our journey.
Yeah, well, so it's interesting, Chris here is saying that he's still looking for a solid grasp on his direction, because for him, it sounds like without the expectations, he didn't feel like he was able to find his way through life the way that he would have wanted to. So it sounds like from his perspective, he wanted some of those boundaries put in place of this is what you should be doing, because that might have given him a clear direction with everything. And so, I think that what's interesting is that it is a tough tension to be able to say, I want you to do something that you love and enjoy. Because, I've met people, and I know you have too, who have been told by their parents, you're going to do this.
Okay.
You're going to do this. I think a great example of this would be my father-in-law. He was told by his mother, you will be a doctor. And he did it. Like, he became a doctor. Yeah. But he hated it. Like, he absolutely hated it because he didn't have any, and he will openly admit this. He's not a people person. In fact, he ended up working as in a morgue. Like, literally, he would do autopsies because then he wouldn't have to deal. But he would get called into court all the time, and so it became too much for him. But that's not what he should have been doing. Right. He was much more drawn towards things like the law. He actually wanted to be a lawyer. My wife's a lawyer. He wanted to be a lawyer, but that's just not really, like, he was just never, he wasn't given that opportunity. Eventually, he did kind of get into that later on in his life. But if you're pushed into that and you're stuck there, I think that can be really hard. But then we have Chris's situation where he was left without that, as much. And he's saying here, if your parents had supported being an artist or a lawyer, do you think you still would have found your way? So I don't know. That's an interesting question. What do you think?
One of the things that I think I'm blessed for having, and I'm lucky that I did have parents that they were driving me in certain directions, as far as we're talking mostly about our career, but they also had other expectations about me. And those expectations were tenacity, not giving up, learning from your mistakes. And these are universal experiences and skills that you can apply regardless of your chosen endeavor. And so we talk about guidance, direction, expectations. I think what we have to be very careful about is demanding that your children or whoever you're influencing follow your instructions and your path, as opposed to giving guidance or giving some positive influence or giving structure. And so maybe that's something, Chris, I don't know if maybe you were lacking in that realm, that the structure has to be in place to have a positive
This is what
impact.
Brad is saying. He said, he used the guidance as a great word, and he's talking about how he wants his boys to be happy, right? Like, he wants their happiness, but he's got to balance that out a little bit. And I think, I think you're right to say that also some of the expectations, some of the ability to even meet we're talking about, of course, this, as you said, we're talking about career type things. But in order to really achieve in the world, or to be the kind of person who can go out and get the things that you want, where in whatever realm you might want to do it, there are some really important things that you do have to have in place for that to happen. So, I think the idea of you being able to go out and to, as an example, you read this article from the ACLU, you then envisioned a future for yourself where you could do that, where you could say, okay, like there was this expectation laid on me, but I'm going to envision a different future for myself and I'm going to seek that out. That takes a certain type of person. And so it sounds like what you're saying in some ways is that the expectations in other parts of your life from your parents actually enabled that to happen. Like it enabled you to envision that dream and then seek that dream out and make it a reality.
Yeah, and the importance of education. I mean, there's a clear expectation in my household that education was vitally important, and almost this impression that you could not be successful without a strong formal education. That may not be accurate. Certainly, we have a lot of people who are very successful without a strong foundation in formal education. But there was that expectation on me, and getting through law school is a lot of formal education. Yeah. So that expectation drove me to be successful in my chosen endeavor.
Right. So if you were going to do it, you're going to go all in and you were going to work super hard at it.
And the only way to achieve success in your chosen endeavor is to go all in and work super hard at it. And that was a major expectation that was placed on me. And I think on a lot of families.
Yeah. So, you know, and this is to Chris's question. I don't know if you're asking, if you're asking both of us, but, you know, I think if I had wanted to be, let's just say, an artist where, you know, I love making film. So let's say I decided, you know what, I'm going to go all out and try to make film. I know my parents would have supported me in trying to do that. I don't think I would have been particularly successful at it, but I think they would have supported me in trying because there was an idea of follow your passion, and the money will come.
Yeah.
But my passion has always been in the realm of religion. And so, you know, every time I've tried to follow anything but that, I have found actually I can do okay. But the truth is that that's where I keep coming back to, like, to where my heart is. I don't know why. It's like it's built into who I am.
Right.
So it's like I think that's part of like knowing yourself, not worrying about the societal expectation, because that's what I want to jump to next.
Yeah.
So what do you think society expected of you, and how did those expectations either help you or hinder you in your life?
Yeah, and so it's a little bit unique situation for me because I grew up in a town where there was nobody that looked like me. I mean, there were minorities or African Americans, a small Asian population. There were not really any Indians, and so I built in my own mind what society expected of me. And I built in my mind that society expected me to resemble the society around me. And so I don't know if you've heard of imposter syndrome. A lot of minorities suffer from this complex, especially.
We did an episode on Kokoro on.
Oh, that's right. Yeah. When we're not surrounded with people like us, we feel that we don't fit in, and that we don't always rise to the same standard unless we meet the expectations of that uniform society that we are the outcast in. And so for me, growing up as a child, I just sort of molded myself into what the society was around me. And so I'm a vegetarian, I'm a Hindu, and I would tell people in school I eat meat and I'm a Christian. Because I wanted to fit in.
Yeah.
Because I thought that's what the expectation is of me. Don't be different. Because nobody else around me looked different or seemed to be from a different background. So for me, because of the culture that I grew up in and the neighborhood that I was involved in or lived in, I created these expectations in my mind that society wanted me to just be fit in a uniform.
Did you feel disingenuous?
Yeah, always.
Doing that?
Always.
Yeah.
Because you know who you are inside.
Right.
I mean, I acted a certain way at home and I acted a different way outside of the home. So my entire childhood, I was living a double life in many respects, right? I mean, I tried to hide it as much as possible, and I was an introvert growing up as a kid because I never wanted to be put in a position where I had to explain why I'm different because of those expectations.
And when did that shift for you?
That shifted as I matured and I've entered adulthood, somewhere around in college. I found a good group of friends who just accepted me for being me. And that's something I was lacking during my childhood. I didn't have a strong social circle where I felt being my own unique self is okay. I found that social circle in college.
Interesting. So yeah, I would pose this to you all, Brad and Chris. do you all feel, did you feel that societal expectations was something that you felt in your life, and was that something that created either, it made you feel accepted, or did you have to end up doing things where in order to meet those expectations, you ended up maybe compromising your ethics or whatever it is that you had to do? I'd be interested to know if that was ever a situation that you faced. It's interesting that you bring up this idea of being disingenuous with yourself and saying like there's an expectation that you be a certain way. I think that for me, what's interesting is that, and I think about this often, is that for me, because, and I'll just say this, my skin tone being so white, right? And you remember when that movie Powder came out?
Yeah.
Back when we were growing up?
Yeah.
So that became my nickname immediately. As soon as that movie came out, that was, everybody called me Powder from that point forward. And so being, and what do you see as like the standard of beauty?
Right.
The standard of beauty is people who are very tan, people who are
tall, dark, and handsome.
Tall,
right?
yeah. I mean, that's the standard. So, basically from the get-go, I did not win the genetic lottery in that regard. What I did have was I could get really big and strong. So and do you remember growing up in like the 80s? Yeah. We saw Arnold Schwarzenegger and Sylvester Stallone and Jean-Claude Van Damme and all these people who were these huge action stars who were totally ripped. And I was like, well, if I can't meet the standard of beauty that is kind of, whatever everybody else has kind of put out there, that expectation, I will then strive towards this other standard. And for a long time, it's kind of sad when you think about it, right? Like I was doing that because I thought, oh, this will make people like me.
Yeah.
And in reality, like the only people, like I was actually, I was like, oh, girls will like this. Girls don't care about muscles. If you look at like who women are with, oftentimes you're like, why did they choose that guy?
Well, that's the problem with these expectations, is that it generalizes.
Yes.
It's based on stereotypes and it generalizes. And you just said, well, girls will like it if I'm like buff and built. But every woman is unique.
Yes.
And so you really don't know what that individual woman's interests are, but we stereotype it, we generalize. Yeah. Those expectations cause us to generalize. I mean, I'm raising a daughter. And, when she was a young girl, 6, 7 years old, she would ask me, am I beautiful? Because society has this expectation on girls from a very young age.
Wow. She was asking it that young.
At that young of an age. And it's heartbreaking to hear that. But it's a wake-up call. It's a realization that society expects girls in particular to be beautiful. And it prizes beauty and those expected ideals of beauty, right? Mm-hmm. Like we just said, tall, dark, and handsome. Society doesn't expect that someone who's short, maybe has some physical deformities, but is extremely brilliant. Right. Is attractive.
Yeah.
It's unfortunate, but my daughter, she's influenced by societal standards all around her. Yeah. At such a young age, it seeps in. And those expectations are all built on generalizations and stereotypes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, do you feel that where you are today, so obviously as an adult, right, you have, there's another side to expectations, I feel like societal expectations, which I think it's kind of a little bit where we started in terms of success. Are you financially successful? Are you successful in your career? Have you done these things? Like what have you like? And so,
we're talking about financial success. I was a government lawyer my entire career, so as far as the ideals of financial success or the expectations of a lawyer being financially successful, I've never met that. Right. I've never achieved that standard. But, it influences the way you behave, though. Yeah. Because when I tell people I'm a lawyer, I know that they have a certain expectation as to how I'm supposed to present myself. Yeah. Right? I mean, your suits are pressed. They're polished shoes. Yeah. Cufflinks. There's certain expectations, and then you try to meet those expectations as well, because you don't want people to think less of you.
Right. Absolutely.
And that's what it causes. It causes some inferiority complexes when you don't meet societal expectations. It's really unfortunate.
Yeah, it is. And even as we get older, I think something that's easier to do and harder to do. It's easier to kind of slough it off and say, whatever.
I don't care anymore.
I don't care about those expectations.
Right.
But I think the flip side to that is that if you didn't meet the expectation earlier or at some point in your life, you can very easily fall into a trap, and this happens to me often, of me saying, I should have done some things differently. Like, I wish I had done things a little bit different. As you said, I was very successful as a pastor, but yet I would sit there and I still looked at myself and say, well, you haven't met XYZ metric or this or that. And so, it's very interesting how expectations can open the world to you and how they can really destroy your ability to assess yourself and to really, I think, see yourself clearly of the things of who you are and kind of what you've achieved in life. Yeah. Would you agree with that?
Yeah,
I don't know.
I agree completely. Yeah. I think that that's the problem with generalizations and stereotypes is as a pastor, your success, I'm not a pastor, but correct me if I'm wrong, your success is heavily driven on the impact you have on the community.
Yeah.
But if you compare yourself to pastors who are working in different communities, you're now holding yourself to certain expectations and standards that may not really be directly relevant to your own community. And so you are trying to achieve a level of success that won't have the same positive impact on your own community because you're not focused on your community.
Right.
And so it really does hinder what true success is.
Yeah.
True success to me is you make a positive impact on the world around you. I think a lot of people would agree with that as well. I think the vast majority of people would agree making this world a better place is the true measure of success. It's not the amount of money you have in your
But that's
bank
not the
account.
expectation.
It's not the expectation, right?
Yeah.
Because we all tell ourselves that the other person is doing financially well, and we compare ourselves to other people.
Right.
So we think the other person's standard is the money in your bank account. When all of us individually, I think we all want to make the world a better place. We want to be happy people. We want to treat people with
Right.
kindness and respect, be treated as we want to be treated. But I think we develop these expectations based on what collectively we just see around us. It's like the same thing with keeping up with the Joneses.
Right.
Like nobody wants to keep up with the Joneses, and we all keep up with the Joneses
Yeah.
because we don't want to be the one that's different on the block.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? It goes back to the way I grew
Well, I
up.
try to keep up with the Baways, but it's hard. It's hard. So Chris said, I think more of the negative societal expectations that were placed on me, and I spent more time trying to disprove them or fit in for those reasons, not to meet a goal, but trying to fight away from one. Yeah, I think that sometimes you're almost trying to prove that society's not. I did that early on, and so I totally understand what you're saying about this, Chris, because for me, I remember this clearly having this conversation with my dad, right? So I was going in for an interview, and I was gonna wear something like this. It was like jeans and something, and he goes, "You're not going in that." And I said, "Why?" I was like, "They're interviewing me for what I know, not for how I look."
Right.
And he goes, "I know." He goes, if the world worked that way, you're absolutely right. It would. And he goes, they should not care what you look like. They should only value you for what you know. But that's just not how people think. And he's like, it's really unfortunate. And it was one of my dad doesn't always have a lot of emotional intelligence around things, but that was one time that I remember him being super emotionally intelligent and being like, look, you're not wrong. Like you're actually right about this. But if you want to get this job, you're going to need to play ball. And I was like, oh, okay. So, and normally, had he come at me and if he had said, put on a suit, what are you doing? This is ridiculous. Like, what do you want to look like this going out there? No, he explained it to me as, no, you're 100% right. It's what's up here that matters,
Right.
and what's up here really, like for the job. But he's like, yeah.
And you did. Did you dress the part?
I dressed the part, and I got the
And
job.
he validated the emotions and the feelings that you had.
Yeah.
But then sort of guided you back on the path to explain to you that the reality is that you're going to have a better chance if you do dress the part.
Yes.
While validating
Yes.
what your thoughts.
You thought, yeah. And I think that taught me something that, if ever my children feel the same way of why should I have to do this? Well, absolutely. Like you shouldn't. You're 100% right. Like if you have certain skills, they should care just about those skills. They shouldn't care. Although today, we're in a completely different time. Now everybody I feel like wears jeans and a t-shirt, so it doesn't really matter.
It's the work from home economy.
Yeah.
Well, talking to Chris's point about fighting the expectations, a story that you told me a while ago about your decision to go to Rice. I feel like you also fought expectations against you because there was an expectation you would never get into such a high-ranked school.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. So the story goes, just I'll tell it real quick. The story is that we were going into it was like summer before senior year. And I was over at a friend's house and I was like, where are you going to apply to school? And he goes, I'm applying to Rice University. And I was like, oh, okay. I was like, I didn't even know where Rice was. I didn't know what it was, but it's a very highly ranked school. It's very hard to get into. And I said, oh, that's cool. He goes, but don't bother looking it up. You would never get in. And from there, I was like, okay, I'm going to go after this with everything I got. But the reason why he said I couldn't get in is because, and he was not incorrect, I didn't have the scores to get into that school, but I was a good swimmer. And that was the thing that I had that other people didn't have. And so I was able to eventually, I got a swimming scholarship to go to Rice, and my friend, he didn't get in. So the whole thing kind of came back to, there was an expectation, and for a long time, I mean, it's true, my relationship with my mom was such that frankly, I felt I was stupid because I'd been told that for most of my life. So if you're talking about expectations that come from parents, my expectation was that I was dumb and that I would fail. And so part of me doing what I did was prove, like, this is like the funny thing I have with my wife, right? Like my autobiography is going to be proving people wrong. That's what I'm always trying to do, is prove people wrong. They say it has to go this way. I say, no, it has to go the other way. And that's been a big driving force in my life. I don't think that's always the best thing to just try to show people that they're wrong.
Right.
But it has really made a huge impact on my bit. Like it changed the trajectory of my life that I wanted to fight and show I can do. I can do the thing you say I can't do, and I'm going to prove to you that I can.
That's an example of a negative expectation that drove you to be actually successful by proving that negative expectation is incorrect.
Yeah. Did you ever have any negatives that were driving you?
Everything's been positive in my life.
But you've spoken about being a minority.
Yeah.
Which in this country, I mean, let's not sugarcoat it. It's not easy being a minority, and particularly a minority to newly immigrated parents to the United States. So I mean, that's a whole kind of bucket unto itself.
Yeah. And I mean, especially there's certain minority communities too where the expectation is you're never going to leave this neighborhood or you're never going to leave this community, or your choices are jail or you might die on the streets. And maybe no one's telling you that, but you're seeing it all around you. And I was very fortunate to have two hardworking parents, college-educated father who really did work hard at his career and imparted on me the importance of education. Mm-hmm. And so, I think minorities all struggle with trying to fit in and always being different and not wanting to stand out. But there's certainly other minority neighborhoods that have a lot more struggles than I did. Certainly, I felt I was very privileged in many respects. As far as negative expectations, I was a runner when I was a kid. My brother, he's, as brothers can be, is like
a little competition.
Yeah, a little competition. I remember when I was in 7th grade, he told me, "You're never going to be varsity. You're too slow to be varsity." Because we got in some kind of argument, as brothers do.
Yeah.
And it actually hurt me.
Really?
It hurt me to the point where I remember crying, and my father coming in my room and consoling me over this. And so that's something to be very careful about, especially when you're laying negative expectations on children. Mm-hmm. That it does really have a major impact, and it sticks with you. Yeah. And I've always felt that I'm not as successful as my brother at running, and he was objectively much more successful than me. But did that sort of hinder my ability to compete at a high level because I was told at a young age
that you couldn't?
And when you say you're not good enough to be varsity, what he's basically saying is you're not going to be good enough as I am.
Right.
And so I saw his times that he was posting for the various distances. Was there a mental block in my mind that I can't achieve that time? I can try to get close to that time, but I'm not going to be able to work hard enough to achieve that time. Mm-hmm. I mean, maybe that mental block caused me to have some hindrances. Maybe I could have been in the Olympics. Who knows? All because of my brother.
Well, I mean, you're bringing up something really interesting that within this whole thing of expectation, because and I would ask you all the same thing, which is that, the expectations, what people say to us so often defines kind of how we think of ourselves. And it can be these little comments. And I'm wondering, has anybody ever said anything to you that changed your expectations of how you felt you could live your life? Did it change the way you live your life? I will say that, part, we've talked about things from like my mother and different things like that. Your brother said those things. I do think that the way when somebody says something to you, it can plant this deep seed inside of you. So I think that, I guess this is the next kind of the final part of this, which is, what are your own personal expectations? Like, what are the things, because you have all of these external pressures, right, that are going on, people saying things, society,
right.
all of that. Now, the question becomes, what's the internal expectation that you're dealing with?
Yeah, and that has changed and shifted over time. I think, when you're younger, your expectations are a lot different than when you grow up and you have a family and you mature and you age. And my expectations have kind of dropped significantly. Not to say that I'm keeping the bar down here so I can easily walk over it. But my expectations are just to be happy, be healthy, treat people kindly and with respect, and raise my kids to just be productive citizens no matter what their chosen endeavor is. Am I going to cringe occasionally when they tell me I want to move to Paris and be an artist? Yes, I will. But I do level expectations that you have to figure this out, and that if you struggle and you fail, you got to figure it out. Yeah. But I do think as we mature, our expectations become simpler.
Yes.
Do you think?
Well, okay, so I'm gonna go back and did you see Brad's comment that he's like, it's hard to run in it's hard to run in a press suit and cufflinks.
The marathon lawyer.
The marathon, yeah, that should be your new shtick from now on. That's a good one. So, I can tell you that for me personally, and I'm interested to know maybe, did you all have different expectations of yourself when you were children? Or like when you were growing up versus where you are now? I can tell you that one of the expectations that I've always had, and I do struggle with this still to this day, is that for me, I have these grand desires to want to impact people in a big way.
Yeah.
And I think part of that comes down to the fact that I've always believed that if you have a good idea, that idea has the potential to change the world, and you see that throughout history. Right. That a grand idea can have this potential, and in the first episode of this, I talked about the Wright brothers and how there was this grand idea for like 100,000 years that humans have dreamed of being able to fly and go wherever they want. Yeah. And it wasn't until these two guys in a bicycle shop in Dayton, Ohio, figured it out in 1903. And within 66 years of that, we're on the moon, right? So that it's this idea that was in the ether of humanity, and they said that can be done. Yeah. We can do that. And I think for me, I think the thing that I really like, my expectation of myself is that you can make this world a better place. And I know that I should be happy making it better for just one person. Yeah. If I can just make one person's life, but in the back of my mind, I'm like, no, if you have the right idea, you could change so many people's lives. And I don't care about being remembered for it. It's not about legacy in the sense of, I want people to remember everything about who I was and, oh, he was a great guy. All I want is, I want that idea to spread and to actually have the potential to do good, because we've seen how bad ideas can cause so much harm. And so, is it not also true, the inverse, that a good idea could change the world and make it such a better place to live in? And that's my expectation of myself. Yeah. And that's a hard expectation, because I may not ever achieve that, like on the grand scale that I want to. I may just have to be okay with, I helped one person, and that one person helps another person, and that's okay.
And it is. And I find that interesting when we compare our backgrounds too. Yeah. Because my idea of living a successful life has always been, you just help one person. Yeah. And as long as you leave this world with helping one person, you left this world better than you found it. Mm-hmm. And in my chosen endeavor, I was a lawyer and I had clients. Mm-hmm. And I tried to help each individual client on each individual case. Your chosen endeavor was much grander and much more philosophical too, but you have a congregation of people, And you're trying to make an impact on that congregation and then further outside of the church on the community at large. And so those expectations that you are talking about sort of are reflective of your upbringing and your career path that you've taken. My expectations are a little bit more reflective on my own upbringing and my career path. For me, it was always, hey, I'm the different guy. I just want to feel like I fit in. Just me fitting in. Much more individualistic. Yours has always been much more grander. But you know what you're saying is you may try and you may fail. And I may try and I may fail. But the idea is you plant the seeds for the generation after you to pick up on what you've done as well. Like you said, something I think that really gets to the heart of who you are as a person. It's not about legacy. It's about helping people, as many people as you can, on a grand scale. And so you do everything you can to try to achieve success in that realm. And if you don't achieve what your expectations are, you still move the ball forward.
Correct.
So that in 2, 3, 4 generations, we can realize what you had set out to achieve. So in many respects, by trying, by pursuing it, you are moving the ball forward towards the goal to meet that idea of expectation you have right now. It's just that you may not.
Well, and
achieve
I
it
think that's the hard thing, because when you've been fed the idea that, like, if you believe in this idea in the back of your mind that you're not going to be successful, like that, if that's the kind of subconscious, message that's always eating at you, then I think that because part of this, I think there's a ghost of expectation, and a ghost is something that haunts you, right? And so I think that the thing that I worry about is I don't want to get to 80, 85, wherever I am at the end of my life, and look back and say, God, I wish I had done more. I wish I had done this. I wish, and I know, and you see, it's irrational because I know that that's not true.
Right.
I know, like, intellectually, I know that what you're saying is absolutely correct. That if I can just move the ball forward just a little bit, that's huge. That's a big deal. But emotionally, it feels like, that expectation, it's a ghost that could haunt me if I don't do everything in my power to try. And I don't know, but I think part of it is another thing that really pushes me towards this is that I know how many people don't care. And how many people don't try. And so if they're not going to do it, I feel like it's on me and somebody like you, and the people who really see this as, we have to do something about it. Like we got to pick up the slack for the people who are just like, whatever, I'm just living life for me. I don't really care about anybody else. And I don't know. I mean, I think that's part of, like, the way I think about community, though, is that we kind of have to, like, pull each other along even when they don't want to go.
Look, the vast majority of people in my life experience that I've come across, they're very selfish people. They're very individualistic. And I think that's why progress is so incremental, and has been historically, is that we just inch our way forward. Because you're one person out of, 7-8 billion people in this world. And you can do amazing things on a major scale, but it's a huge world out there. And so even the impact that you're going to have, the worry is, when I hear you talk about being 80, 85 years old and thinking I could have done more, the worry is, unless you release yourself from that sort of expectation, no matter what you achieve,
right, it will never be enough.
It will never be enough.
No.
It will never be enough.
And that's why it's intellectually, I know that. It's the emotional where I have to, like, unwind that.
Right.
And so I guess I would end it as, like, I'm interested in kind of going down this road as we kind of close out, which is, and I'd ask you guys this if you're still there, are there any ghosts of expectations that follow you in your life, and something that's hard for you to be able to, that you're unable to shake it, to let it go. So I'm interested, do you have any ghosts with those expectations? And what are you aiming for the future? Like, what's your expectations of yourself for the future? You've named a little bit of it, but I'm interested to know. So I guess I'm interested in those two things. Do you have any ghosts of expectations that still follow you?
And so when we talk about being a minority, remember, I'm Indian American. And if you actually look at the statistics, Indian Americans are very financially successful. Like, they're actually one of the most financially successful minority groups in the United States of America.
Yeah.
And the kind of career path that I took, it didn't lead to like those riches.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so that ghost of expectation has always been on me, that I feel like I do fit in, but even within my own community, I sort of took the public service route. I was a public defender. I worked for the government. I didn't work for corporate America. I didn't make a lot of money as general counsel for some big Fortune 500 company.
Yeah.
And so that's always kind of followed me throughout my life, of not meeting that expectation. And
Have you ever felt judged for that?
Yeah, all the time. Actually, all the time. And by a lot of people in my own community as well.
Interesting.
Maybe people more so from my own community than outside my community,
Wow.
which I've always tried to fit in with people outside of my community. And I feel that I've been judged in this realm much more by people in my community. Because a lot of the Indians who go into law from my generation, they don't take the public service route. Maybe you're seeing maybe more and more in the younger generation, but people my age, a lot of them went into patent law. Why? Because it's a science background.
Interesting, yeah.
It's an engineering background.
Yeah.
And their parents had expectations, I'm sure, on them to push them in that direction. So they were engineers, and then they wanted to do law, and you can make a lot of money being a patent lawyer.
Yeah.
So that's always sort of haunted me and followed me around. But as I've matured, as I said, for me personally, my expectations that I've had as I've grown through life, I don't want to say has diminished, but they've become simpler. To me, I just expect to treat people kindly, to have them treat me kindly, to get along with my neighbors, and to just feel, all right? And this is emotional too. To feel when I'm 80 or 85 years old, can I say that the world is a little bit better because of me? That I didn't do more harm than good. I did more good than harm. But it may not be on a grand scale as that ghost of expectation is on you. For me, it's, did I leave this place just a little bit better? Did I do my part to incrementally move the ball forward?
Can I ask you, based on your role as a judge, where does not the ghost of expectation, but future expectations? Like if for yourself, what's something that you envision for yourself, like a hope and an expectation that you can have being a judge? You know, you and I talk very often about how fairness is so important to you and how it's something that really pushes you forward, of wanting people to always come into your courtroom knowing that they got a fair shake. Like that's critical to you. And I think that's such an amazing thing to hear from a public official like yourself, that matters so much to you. So, you know, you've achieved this dream of getting into this job. Do you have any further expectations going forward? Is there something that you'd like to see?
I did before I achieved being a judge. I did. I thought of myself, well, what's the next step? I always thought, what's the next step? Well, I want to be on the appellate court. Because on the appellate court, you can make a lot more change on a grander scale as you envision doing, right? The decisions you make could have more impact across the state than on just one individual person as a trial court judge. But once I became a judge, sort of the gravity of the position, and again, I'm not trying to toot a horn or anything like that. It's just you just understand the gravity of the role that you're now in. And to me, I never envisioned that I would be in a role where I could affect somebody's life positively. And I do criminal work. I'm a criminal court judge. So people are coming into the courtroom facing some harsh consequences, and they maybe have done some bad things. And even for those individuals, I have an opportunity to make some kind of positive impact on that individual's life. And so I think that, you know, with experience, you just get better at what you do. And for me, I just want to settle in and become a better judge. I don't have those grand expectations of being on the Supreme Court of the United States and writing a decision that overnight has nationwide impact on everybody. I mean, it'd be an amazing opportunity to have that, and I'll be blessed to have that. But what I've realized is I can make a difference in an individual's life in the role that I have now. But I'm a very young judge. I've been on the bench 2 years, and I also recognize that I can be a much better judge with more experience doing this. And so if I settle into this job, work hard every day, don't necessarily have to move up the ranks, so to speak, but I can become better at what I'm doing.
Yeah. And I think that's something that you and I share together, that one of our expectations is, and I really love this about you, is that you always want to just improve yourself wherever you are. I think that there's something really kind of beautiful about that, which is the idea that wherever I am, I'm going to do the best that I can. I'm going to put forth my best product, my best work effort, and because you deserve that from me, and I'm going to do that. And I'll tell you a little brief story about this because I think it's just an interesting one. And Brad agrees with you there. He says, "You well said, Sunil," and you are very well spoken. I think that I remember. So I ran an internship with a bunch of youth when I was a pastor. This is when I was doing youth pastoring, and I bring in youth who are in high school to run the middle school group over the summer, so they get a sense of what it was like to be a youth pastor. And I remember we were putting together a presentation. It was like for a youth group, for teaching, and they had to put together a PowerPoint. Mm-hmm. And I told them, I basically sat down, I was like, this PowerPoint looks like garbage, is what I basically said to them. And they said, they're not gonna care. And I said, oh, you're absolutely right. I said, they won't care at all, but you should care. Yeah. Because you always need to make sure, even if they don't notice it, you need to have put forth your best effort. And I don't know if you ever heard of the Van Halen story. Do you know the Van Halen story?
The band?
Yeah, Van Halen. So they were notorious for having this thing in their contract where it was like they wanted all this stuff done in the green room for them and all that kind of stuff. And one of the things was they wanted to make sure that all the brown M&Ms had been taken out of, or have been taken like literally, like it seems
taken
like
out of the bowl.
Taken out. It's like a diva thing. It seemed like, but the reason they did that is because they could walk in, Eddie Van Halen would walk in, he would look directly at the M&M bowl, and if there were brown M&Ms in there, they wouldn't do the show because they knew that they hadn't taken care of putting the set together. So the idea was, if you're paying that close attention, you get down to that detail, then he knows it's going to be safe to go out because they were working with pyrotechnics and all kinds of things. And so the idea is that details matter. They matter a great deal. And in fact, you doing your best matters, even when people don't realize it or you think don't appreciate it. You always got to do that. And that's something that's an expectation that you put on yourself, that I put on myself, that I think is actually one of the. I think that's something that I revere highly, and I greatly appreciate just that's something that you care about.
Yeah, and I appreciate that you gave that story. And I've seen the same thing in you, in the way you conduct yourself and the way you approach every endeavor that you take on, every project you take on. Mm-hmm. But I think what's important is that we do focus on being in the present, and we just try to be the best person that we can be. And to me, if you're the best person that you can be, you can make some positive impact on somebody. And you may not even directly see that positive impact. Mm-hmm. But if you're shuffling through life and you're always kind of giving it a half effort, there are going to be people that you interact with in your life who are going to be impacted. Mm-hmm. And so now the question is, what kind of impact do you want to leave on them? And you may not even know what impact you have left on them, but if you're trying your best, I think you're going to have a much more positive impact than if you don't give it your best effort.
Yeah.
So, that's why I try to tell my kids. Again, we go back to what the expectation is of their jobs. I mean, I hope that they are happy and they're healthy, but it doesn't matter what they're. They're a pipe fitter, they're a pipe fitter. If they're an artist, they're an artist. If they're a teacher, they're a teacher. Just whatever you choose, be the best that you can be at it. And that might not be the best.
Right.
There
There's
are
a
other
difference,
people
right?
that are always going to be better.
Yeah.
Be the best that you can be at it.
Yeah.
And if you can do that, then you gave everything that you can give them, and you're going to have a good life, I think.
Oh, I completely agree with that. Well, I feel like we've had a pretty good conversation.
Yeah, it was good. I like the talk. And thanks, Chris, and thanks, Brad, for giving us your experiences as well.
Yeah, and we're gonna have more of these conversations in the future. You were great on whatever episode it was you were on.
Risk.
Regret, risk, whatever it was. it was great having you on. I will say this again. I'm just very happy that you are a judge in our judicial system. Like, I think that really makes a big difference, knowing that and I know that there's a lot of really great judges out there, but it makes me, knowing you the way that I do, I'm like, it makes me feel good to know that people will get a fair shake, and that they're gonna really, that you're gonna care for them regardless of what they've done, and you're gonna say, okay, like you deserve to have a fair trial. And I just think that's so important in our world today, where it feels like fairness and other things are maybe not as high priority for everyone. And so I'm really glad that you can bring that to the bench in the way that you do.
Well, thank you for sharing that, Alex, and thank you for what you're doing. And I hope this is having a positive impact on the people that are watching.
Absolutely. Well, thank you all for being here, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your week, and we'll look forward to seeing you next week.